All right, everyone. Steve Metrics here at Db8 Sports. Your boy DJ Triggs should be here with us. Hopefully, he can make it with us in time. He's a little caught up in traffic, but he will hopefully be here with us later tonight. So, with that, big things that happened over the weekend: NFC, AFC Championship games, pretty big games between the Niners and the Lions and the Ravens and the Chiefs. And they both went kind of opposite what people were thinking. People definitely thought San Francisco could handle Detroit, and the Ravens should have taken care of the Chiefs. But up until the final quarter ish of the Niners Lions game, the Niners came back, and then pretty much the Ravens were just pretty much outmatched by the Chiefs the majority of that game, outside of two back-to-back fluke plays by Zay Flowers, and then your late interception by Lamar Jackson in the end zone. Absolutely gut-wrenching way to lose for the Ravens against the Chiefs. And San Francisco, I don't know, like they feel like they should be dominant, but it just feels like when you actually watch them play, something about that team is not clicking on defense. This is a team that should be pretty darn good against the run. And unfortunately, their secondary is about mediocre. If you really take a step back, look at it, analyze it, that's really what you're going to see. They really make their money on defense by applying that pressure, applying that pass rush, having a strong linebacking core, and then the time that it takes for those pass rushers to get to the quarterback really helps force really bad throws to the targets that quarterback is throwing to, which makes things easier for those corners. However, if the pressure doesn't come to the quarterback, then those corners kind of get exposed for San Francisco. But the worst thing that's happening over the last 2 weeks is that both Green Bay and Detroit have both run successfully against that defense of San Francisco, which is supposed to be very stout. And it's not looking that way. Jahmyr Gibbs has had an excellent game against San Francisco. Even David Montgomery had some really solid runs. And 2 weeks ago, Aaron Jones really ran well against San Francisco by himself. So it's really looking like San Francisco, to me, is going to have trouble against the run. And there's really nobody that runs harder with more anger in a way than Isaiah Pacheco and the Kansas City Chiefs. They have a very momentum kind of style of running that is very hard to stop if you are not a good run defense. And we'll see about San Francisco, but I just get the feeling that they're going to be exposed on the ground. And as that begins to happen, when they try to bring up support to stop that run, that's going to take a lot of pressure away from that secondary. And then that's where I think Kansas City is going to really expose them, is with those wide receivers. Because if they focus on stopping the run, focus on stopping Travis Kelce, that's really going to open up things for those wide receivers. So that's something I'll talk about in a little bit here coming up. But that's kind of something that I think is starting to get a little glaring and is really starting to speak its weight in volume, I guess, with what's going on with that 49ers defense. So you have that going on there. On the other side, looking at Baltimore and what they did against Kansas City, and it's very bizarre because the way that game started, the way they ran the ball effectively with Gus Edwards, getting pretty much a good 15-yard carry right at the start of the game, and then he never saw the ball again until later in the second half of that game, really shows that Gus Edwards was doing his thing against a tough run defense in Kansas City, but for whatever reason, they chose to back away from that. And they made that choice, but it's obvious to me that is their true path to victory. And then making the easier kind of throws for Lamar Jackson to Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely, That's pretty much their style of play because unfortunately, I think when it comes to the Ravens, they don't have enough targets on offense. Zay Flowers is great. And it was talked about that in the preseason and training camps that Zay Flowers was clearly miles above the best wide receiver on the Baltimore Ravens. And yes, this championship game on Sunday, it showed that because honestly, there was very little Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay. But even the worst thing about that was there was like no Odell Beckham. And I checked the injury report during this game because I was confused. I'm like, I don't know where Odell Beckham is for a guy who runs routes as beautifully as Odell Beckham does. Why is he not getting targeted the ball? Is Lamar Jackson not finding him or something? If that's the case, is he hurt? Nothing on the injury report, and nothing when he was playing the game either. So pretty tough matchup going on there, and it was what it was with that. So I think Baltimore clearly needs to get more targets on offense in the passing game. But for that being the case, then why do they completely abandon the rush and the run game? So I'm not 100% sure why they did that. But to me, it looked like they were having success against Kansas City, even at most being down 10, whereas San Francisco was down 17 against Detroit and still had no fear feeding Christian McCaffrey when the moment called for it. So pretty bizarre game by the Ravens against the Chiefs. But the thing that's also starting to flare up that I've noticed with the Chiefs is that confidence in the wideouts. There's starting to be a building of trust with Mahomes and MVS, definitely with Rashee Rice. And even though it's not as much, you still have that consistency with Justin Watson as well. So I think there's some really key points to this offense that is really showing that it can definitely get the job done. And we've seen that over the last few weeks. We've seen some good catches by MVS. You definitely have solid play by Rashee Rice, and it looks really like it's starting to come together. Mahomes looks more poised as well too. Where, to be honest, I feel like even last season into the majority of this season, it looked like he was banged up. It really looked like he didn't have as much gas on his throws as he usually does. And I think that's changed, to be honest. Ever since the Raider game on Christmas, it feels like Mahomes has really gotten into a groove with his targets. Even Kelsey has gotten stronger and healthier and looks more like his form from 2023 as opposed to 2022 as opposed to the 2023 season. So I think that's a really good sign for the Chiefs and what they're doing, and it brings that confidence back. And again, too, with San Francisco having problems stopping the run, I think this allows Kansas City to have a truly balanced game. And for a team that is now starting to have targets that are trusted on offense for the wideouts, having a dominant tight end in Travis Kelsey, having a strong quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, and now having that elite level defense that's good on both sides of the football on run defense and especially their secondary, and really bringing the house that Steve Spagnuolo brings. This is looking really, really, really sharp for that Kansas City Chiefs defense. So I like what they got going there. And I think this is, I mean, honestly, that's almost the perfect playbook and almost the perfect mix for building a team going into every game. And now, too, there's a little bit better chemistry on the offensive line, too. There's a little bit better protection going on for Mahomes, a little better run blocking for Pacheco. So you have some really good things going on here. And for a team that just took down the Ravens, just took down the Bills, beat up a high-flying Miami Dolphin team in sub-zero ice-cold weather. These are like three really, really good signs for Kansas City, whereas San Francisco has now struggled against Detroit, struggled against Green Bay, and had a week off. I just think for for a team that we thought was so dominant in San Francisco, that had all these weapons that could go toe to toe with anyone, then why are they having trouble against teams that haven't been as, I guess, established as a San Francisco? Green Bay definitely has weapons, and they're growing up as well, but so does Detroit. Detroit clearly has as many weapons as San Francisco, so that's beginning to happen as well. So we have that going on too. So you have that, and then let's look at Kansas City. Let's just honestly call out the weapons that they have outside of the quarterback position. So even going into this game too, I think now with where we are with the poise, the familiarity of the game, to me, I think Mahomes clearly has a leg up on Brock Purdy from that aspect, that it's just a bigger stage, bigger volume. There is a bit of jitters and acclimation that come into this, and now Mahomes has experienced it 3 different times before this game. This will be his 4th Super Bowl that he's going to be playing in his career, whereas Brock Purdy, this will truly be his first as a true participant. So it's going to be different. It's going to be hard to get to, but I've always said the 49ers have 4 legit targets and weapons on offense. But then how many weapons does Kansas City have outside Mahomes? Well, obviously Travis Kelce. Now we're seeing Isaiah Pacheco become that guy on the ground game. And then in the receiving game, I think truly the best receiver on that team is that rookie Rashee Rice. So right there, that's at least 3. And with the talent of Mahomes, if he can make something out of one of those other wideouts, whether it's Justin Watson or Marcus Valdes-Scantling, I think that's something that really allows Kansas City to make something happen with their game against the San Francisco 49ers, who really have 4 weapons minus Brock Purdy. So I think this game is extremely close in terms of offensive capabilities. But I think when it comes to defense, I think now what we're seeing is that Kansas City is just more stout and truly a better all-around defense than San Francisco is right now. San Francisco, against these teams that have these true weapons and a really solid quarterback, is struggling. And Green Bay pretty much did what Kansas City is going to do. They have a dynamic quarterback. They have a really good run game. They have some good targets to throw the ball to. And pretty much the majority of that game, up until Green Bay just stopped running the football, Green Bay had some real problems for the San Francisco 49ers. So I think now this is the kind of game that Kansas City is going to lean on whatever they feel they're most confident with as that game progresses, and then having the ability to bounce back and forth as they see the pressures or the attention change to whatever parts of the defense San Francisco is going to try to address. And I think Kansas City is going to be able to counter that really, really well. And on top of that, the pieces they have on defense between their corners and their pass rush, and then just bringing in that pressure, bringing in the house, is really going to make a difference. And we know that towards the end of the Ravens game, there was a Kansas City Chiefs player that was hurt on their defensive line, who tore his ACL. He's done, and hopefully he's able to play at some point next season. But that's definitely going to be tough for sure. So we'll see what happens there. Hold on down the fort a little bit to see if my boy DJ TRIGGS is with us. So we're seeing what's happening there, and hopefully he's joining us here shortly. But speaking of players that tore their ACL and that kind of news, big news dropped today that today is Tuesday, January 30th. Yesterday, on Monday, another player had ACL surgery. It went successful. Things are good. I'm glad for that player. But that really good tight end that we love here at No Debate Sports, TJ Hawkinson, just had his ACL surgery yesterday, and it's January. So, I mean, really, when we're looking at getting into the season, we're looking at it's going to be 7 months basically until the season really fires up, right? So we got February, March, April, May, June is really when team activities start to fire up around June, July. So that's 6 right there. August is definitely preseason. And then September is 8 months out. Well, actually, it's even worse if we think about it, right? So this is end of January. So if we're taking full months, we're really taking February, March, April, May, June, July, August. That is 7 months right. We got 8 getting us into September. So we have that going on. It's going to be 8 months for TJ Hawkinson. And I know there are players that come back a little bit early. Obviously, Kyler Murray is one of those players who did it this season. They really gave him enough time to really wait until kind of halfway through the season to give him more time to rest. But I think when you look at this for TJ Hawkinson, and we really don't know the full direction of the Minnesota Vikings offense. Are they going to retain Kirk Cousins? What is the style that they're going to do with the tight end? Last time I checked, I'm pretty sure Irv Smith Jr. is that tight end that's up there in Minnesota, and he can do a good job. He can definitely do his thing. But I think what's going to happen with Minnesota, and they have an offensive-minded head coach, is they're going to have to really lean on those wide receivers, lean on your quarterback, and then really get things to develop with that run game. So Alexander Madison, that really didn't happen. The other guy behind him who definitely has his concern with his leg injuries is Cam Akers. And I hope we really get to see that. It sucks that him and Sean McVay really bucked heads in LA, but Minnesota clearly is going to have to lean on it. If you're not getting as dominant of a play from Irv Smith Jr. that you're expecting to get from TJ Hawkinson, you're going to have to open it up elsewhere and maybe you utilize more of a run blocking tight end so that way that Cam Akers can get the job done. Obviously, at some point in this upcoming draft, Minnesota is going to have to look at both the running back and the tight end position. And yes, there's a million wide receivers out there too. So you got to get those guys because you're also looking at a guy who also has leg issues in Justin Jefferson now. So it's almost like they have all these dominoes that are starting to fall, but it still feels like you have that cohesion there with a guy like Kirk Cousins who can make that happen, but they absolutely need that quarterback. Not having that quarterback, like what they lost with Josh Dobbs, definitely hurt them going into that season because it kind of felt like that momentum was coming their way that they could probably go toe-to-toe with Detroit. They could definitely take down a Green Bay at some point. And if they do those things, they could have won that NFC North, but things didn't go that way, and they definitely went south. And now you got this feeling that almost your house of cards is starting to fall. So they're going to have to clean up these things. I think right now this gives Kirk Cousins a ton of leverage to stay in Minnesota, to get whatever financial compensation he sees fit. But Minnesota has to give in to him essentially. They have to maintain a strong quarterback for that team to just tread water essentially at the wide receiver, at the running back, at the tight end position. So I think that's the style that they're going to have to go with the Minnesota Vikings. So if there is any hope, in all honesty, with TJ Hawkinson coming back, I would think it would be on a postseason playoff run. And right now, my obvious, well, not obvious, but my sense of looking at the NFL moving into next season, I think the NFC North could clearly be one of the toughest divisions to win, just like we saw with the AFC North. That was a really hard-nosed, toe-to-toe division. We're looking at something with, depending how Chicago manipulates their way through the draft, especially that round one, if they keep trading back and keep gaining picks, I think Chicago could do something where they assemble a really strong receiving core, draft running backs, have Cole Kmet, keep Justin Fields, build more on that defense, build more on that offensive line through the draft, Chicago has some pretty sneaky things that they could do, that they could be right there with the other NFC teams. And to be honest, the NFC as a whole is not that strong of a conference for getting 7 teams into the playoffs as the AFC is. The top of the NFC is definitely stacked, like we saw, but those other NFC North teams are all going to have a position to fight their way into the playoffs. So you got some interesting things there. The one thing to me that became very apparent that had to happen for one of these teams is Detroit. That was the team that I thought could have the most possibility of moving backwards compared to what we saw with what they did this season. And my concern with Detroit is if they were to have lost their offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson, I think that would have really had severe repercussions for that offense. I think whenever you see a offensive coordinator change teams, the team that they left has trouble refiguring out that language and really trying to establish that dominance and that swagger that they had, before, when that coordinator was on that team. So obviously the most recent one we saw was Philadelphia. So losing Shane Steichen to Indianapolis, what happened? Philadelphia took a step back. Indianapolis definitely took a step forward. Looking out west, looking at the LA Chargers, with how many coordinators Justin Herbert has had to go through over the years, it's really had a problem with his development. He had an explosive rookie and sophomore season in the NFL, but the other seasons after, and there have been injuries, have definitely been a mixed bag. And it's so much turnover on the OC that it makes it tough for that quarterback to really figure out what is the language, what's the chemistry, and how do I establish that chemistry with the players who are already on my team. It can definitely have trouble there. And then going back a little bit further, I think the biggest one to me that is the most obvious when you see change of coordinators is Atlanta. So when Kyle Shanahan left the Falcons and went to the 49ers, that was pretty much the demise of that entire team. Matt Ryan regressed, and eventually Dan Campbell got fired. And I think there were still parts even before then that I think Dan Campbell struggled at. But that whole offense, with what Kyle Shanahan took away, Matt Ryan was never the same. And that was the best final season of Matt Ryan's career. So whenever we've seen that happen, it's had a difference. Even recently to this season, the previous season, we saw the former offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, with Geno Smith being that comeback player of the year, having a great season with his targets that he made, and just really nullifying his turnovers and all that. Well, what happened was his offensive coordinator left Seattle and went down south to Tampa Bay. So it's interesting because Geno kind of got worse. Seattle as an offense, to me, improved and really showed that they can actually develop a third wide receiver in Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I love seeing that. But Geno took a step back, and he took a step back to the point where this is a team that is now really starting to turn the wheels and really think that, is Geno truly that quarterback we need to go forward? Personally, I don't think he is. But what happened was that OC went from Seattle all the way down to Tampa Bay. So in Tampa, Baker Mayfield had a fantastic season. Mike Evans had a fantastic season. Chris Godwin did well too. Kate Otten, pretty good tight end. There's even a third wide receiver there that I'm not 100% on, but he had a pretty good season and did pretty well in the postseason as well. And now that offensive coordinator is now the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. So when it comes to a team that I think I would probably avoid to a certain extent going into next season, that would probably be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I would probably avoid those players now as much as possible, because that team is going to take a step back. I think part of the saving grace, though, is even though he's technically not a coach and we don't really see him there much, but I think he's definitely had a point or an influence. And we know this from Tom Brady's experience with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is that it takes the quarterback of Tampa Bay 2 years to really understand this Bruce Arians system. And as long as Bruce Arians is there, which he is, Todd Bowles is still the head coach. I think that works well with Baker Mayfield because, in a way, Bruce Arians is the one who's really kind of calling that offense. So I think that is what is going on with Tampa Bay and now losing that coordinator to the Carolina Panthers. So that's kind of what's going on there. So we got a shout out by James Hack, our guy. And what do I think is going on with Belichick next year? Yeah, he's definitely not the guy to work fast food for sure. But Belichick to me is a guy that I think would do really well kind of doing like a NFL films kind of critique. And he had some experience on the like the top 100 players of all time kind of thing. I thought he did a really great job with that. And I think that's something that suits him really well. Like if there was something out there that would be made between Bill Belichick and Mike Mayock, I think that like the minds and depth of knowledge that those two guys have is absolutely incredible. And I hope Mike Mayock is still doing something out there with the NFL. I haven't really heard much of him since he was the GM of my Raiders. But man, the spirit and passion that that guy had, combining that with the knowledge that Bill Belichick has, honestly, I think that would be really awesome. I don't see Belichick really getting into coaching ever again, to be honest. I just, unless it were some kind of like small kind of like college to like bring him up from the depths of whatever kind of thing, kind of like in my eyes, kind of like a Rick Pitino did with Iona, and now he's up at St. John's kind of thing. Like kind of that comeback story, I think would be kind of cool for Belichick. But outside of that, I just don't see it really happening. The NFL, in my opinion, is moving past him, and it's really moving past a lot of these defensive coaches in general. This is now one of the most recent Super Bowls where basically each of the head coaches in the Super Bowl and the majority of the coaches in the playoffs are all offensive minded. So I think that's something that really factors into what's going on here. And I think a Belichick defensive mind, and think about it this way too, if he shows up on your team, your offensive coordinator is Josh McDaniels. That's going to happen, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants that kind of toxic atmosphere that has now been going on in New England, Denver, and with my Raiders. So you got a lot of that baggage that could come along with a Bill Belichick. And I think teams want to stay clear of that. Possibly if they were to bring in Mike Vrabel as well, maybe that works together. But just looking at how teams chose to operate this season, they've all basically passed on Mike Vrabel, Bill Belichick, and who's the third one? Kind of Pete Carroll in a way. Pete Carroll getting fired to me really doesn't make any sense. I don't understand how that's going on. So it's kind of tough to see what happened up there with Pete Carroll in Seattle. But basically all of those guys, I mean, they want to run the teams their way. And if the team doesn't want to give them that autonomy, then they're not going to be there anymore. So New England took that away, Seattle took that away, and Tennessee definitely took that away. And I kind of had my feelings that Tennessee would probably do something, just going back to the fact that back when they were in the playoffs against Cincinnati, I just hated the way that Tennessee lost that game. It's kind of like how Baltimore just lost. It's kind of like how the Green Bay Packers lost. When you're running the ball well and effectively with a certain player, you stick with that player. You don't abandon them. And in a way, there are times where football is somewhat emitting parts of baseball where you have a hot hand, you stay with them. Or if you don't have your starting pitcher doing what they do and you go to the relief pitcher and that guy's figuring out, then you work the game with that pitcher. Same thing goes in football. What most of the time we see that at the running back position. Every now and then we'll see that with a Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts kind of situation, but those are rare. Even maybe a Drew Bledsoe, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, Tony Romo. We saw those situations at quarterback, but it's rare. It's really, really rare. Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes, Alex Smith, and Colin Kaepernick, that kind of stuff. It's rare. The majority of the time we're seeing that is at the running back position. That's where we're really seeing guys that take over, do their thing, or they're doing really well, and then for whatever reason, the coach abandons the said player's name. So I think that's kind of tough. And from that game is that is what definitely led to Mike Vrabel being let go. And in a way too, I mean, now if you're Baltimore, this is something that has to be brought up, whether it's John Harbaugh or the Todd Monken from Georgia, who they brought in as the new OC. I think Todd Monken did an excellent job this season until this playoff game. I just don't understand where he was coming from with this, what his strategy was, what that idea was moving forward. And it's really, really tough knowing what his thought was when you had success with Gus Edwards and you truly only have one target outside of your tight end on offense. And to be honest, you have a quarterback, to me, that still struggles with progressions. He has a good arm. He can take off really well. But you get that quarterback rattled. You bring the pressure, bring the house on him. He struggles. So to take part of that off, you need to run the ball, and you need to run it through that great offensive line that the Baltimore Ravens have. So I think this is something that is now bringing up a check mark for a cause of concern for both John Harbaugh and Todd Monken. And then the other thing too, I mean, if we go back a couple seasons ago too, John Harbaugh was making some really odd decisions at the end of games. I want to say it was the game that we saw between Green Bay and Baltimore, where he went for consecutive 2-point conversions that ended up bringing that team to play in overtime. And then they lost to Green Bay because of that. Excuse me. So these are multiple games that really don't make sense for Baltimore and what they're doing. So it's a real bummer what's going on there, but it is what it is. So I don't know. I think that's kind of what happens for some of these teams. But then when you start to have losing seasons like Vrabel did with the Tennessee Titans, that's what makes it to the point that you're going to move on in a different direction when a coach has that. Same thing with Arthur Smith in Atlanta, even Dan Quinn in Atlanta as well. They both started to go down that track, those train of thoughts that they shouldn't have gone. But it is what it is. So there's 2 head coaching positions now in the NFL that are open. There is Washington and Seattle. And the interesting news that we got later this afternoon today was that Ben Johnson with Detroit was flying out to Washington. And midway through the flight, he said, I'm out. I'm not going to be the head coach of Washington. And I'm going back to Detroit. And we're going to give it another go to get this. Since that news has broke, there's been 2 different stories that I've heard. I have now seen one story that says that he did not interview well, and I'm also hearing that he was not. Well, let's put it this way: he was asking for more money than teams were willing to give him as a head coach. And to me, both those stories now paint Ben Johnson in a negative light when we knew before the championship game that he had 3 interviews, all back to back to back in like pretty much the 11th hour when he had to get those in, because from that point going into the championship, or maybe it was the divisional round against Tampa. Yes, I think it was that. The divisional round against Tampa Bay, once he had those games, he could no longer interview any longer beyond that. And I think what happened there is that he had those interviews. From my accounts, they went really well. Who those 3 teams are, I'm not 100%, but if it's Washington, Seattle, and a third mystery team, then maybe that team was Carolina. I'm kind of thinking. Because Carolina did have, in my eyes, kind of like a similar young up and coming offensive mind. Joe Brady was kind of one of those guys who's now the OC of Buffalo. And I think he will also be a head coaching candidate next season as well. But you had similar stuff going on in Carolina. Joe Brady didn't last. He was part of the Matt, or was it Frank Reich? I think he was either part of Frank Reich or Matt Rule's regime. And when they were gone, he was gone. So he went to Buffalo and worked with Josh Allen. So good stuff there. Also today we know Ken Dorsey's with Cleveland, but I kind of think that's actually kind of a negative as well for Cleveland moving forward. So both Cleveland and Tampa are now 2 teams in the fantasy spectrum that I would take a second look and try to take another player that's closely ranked to those guys instead of players from those teams, because in my eyes, I just don't think Ken Dorsey's that good of a play caller. So I don't like what's going on there. What was the other move today? We know Arthur Smith took a offensive coordinator job with Pittsburgh, and prior to being in Pittsburgh, he was with the Tennessee Titans as a offensive play caller before going to Atlanta. How things didn't work in Atlanta, I think it's definitely quarterback driven. I really don't understand how that team did not take a serious look at trying to negotiate for Lamar Jackson. That's still something that your boy DJ Triggs and myself are really perplexed by. We thought Atlanta could have definitely been a strong destination for Lamar Jackson to go to, as well as Tennessee. Both Atlanta and Tennessee seemed like they were the most positive options that he could have gone to. So really shocked that wasn't pushed harder by the Atlanta Falcons. And I think he would have been a really good fit. And that's another team that is just dying to get a high-end quarterback. And could those guys make a play to get a Kirk Cousins, or I don't know. Russell Wilson might be an option for the Atlanta Falcons as well. So I think that's what's going on there. But you really need a offensive mind for a head coach, in my opinion, because your offensive-minded head coach is going to have less turnover, to be honest, at his position of figuring out who's calling those plays. Whereas a defensive-minded coach is going to have constant turnover in a way, because those really good OCs are going to end up getting head coaching jobs in some aspect, whether it's the pros, maybe it's college. You're going to be running through more OCs as a defensive play caller as opposed to a offensive mind. But then you might be a guy like a John Harbaugh or a Nick Sirianni, who is kind of a special teams kind of guy, and you're just really kind of winging it at both sides of the ball. So that's another interesting aspect as well that a head coaching option can bring. So, yeah, this Ben Johnson stuff was kind of a shock today. I thought going into this head coaching off season that Ben Johnson would be the number one coach to go after. To be honest, I have no idea who the Tennessee Titans coach is. Raheem Morris did not do well last time when he was a head coach, taking over for John Gruden's Super Bowl team in Tampa Bay, which was really taking over for what's his name, the former Indianapolis Colts head coach who works NBC. But yeah, that kind of transition didn't work so well. So I'm not too excited about Raheem Morris. I'm not excited about the Titans coach that I don't even know about. I do like seeing the Buccaneers coach go to Carolina because it has to be someone who kind of does their new thing there, whether it works with Bryce Young or what's to say maybe Baker Mayfield doesn't follow him to Carolina as well. I think that would be kind of cool. And to be honest, I if I'm the head coach and if I'm the owner, I try to make that happen in a weird twist of fate because Dave Tepper just saw Baker Mayfield like 2 years ago, if that. So you have some weird stuff going on there in the NFC South. Pretty weird division. I believe New Orleans also fired their offensive coordinator as well. But again, I'm not a Derek Carr guy. I mean, I like him as a person, but that New Orleans team to me is a team that is really on the brink of firing that head coach. And there's a lot of weird things going on there. Sean Payton left Denver. You have John Gruden, who's kind of like this shadow figure coaching up Derek Carr and former tight end from the Raiders as well is down there. So you have some weird stuff going on with New Orleans, and it kind of looks like it's sharks in the water just getting ready to pounce when that head coach gets terminated next season. So maybe that's a team too that has some really cool weapons on offense that a coach like Ben Johnson wants to go to next year. There's also the possibility too that if Dallas flames out in a similar style like they did this year, that they make a change on the head coaching job. And to be honest, if I'm a new up and coming head coach and I have an option to go to New Orleans or Dallas, and let's put out those other four teams, even five. If we put out Carolina, Washington, Seattle, Tennessee, and Atlanta, I think the only job to me that screams that it's at the top of the list to me is Atlanta because they have really great weapons on offense. They need a quarterback. They have some good things going on with that defense. I think Atlanta is a really cool job. But then after that, to me, both New Orleans and Dallas are better than all of those other jobs that I just brought up. So if I'm a Ben Johnson or I'm a Joe Brady or what's to say John Gruden doesn't show up in the NFL too because he's an offensive-minded head coach. I think all three of those coaches would have a very strong appeal to any of those teams, whether you're Dallas or the New Orleans Saints. So I like the options that those guys have to get a new head coaching job. And I think both New Orleans and Dallas are going to be huge teams that aren't going to care about filling that position quickly like Tennessee and Atlanta were. I really just don't get it because to me, Ben Johnson is the cream of the crop. He is the number one offensive coordinator out there who should be getting a job. Both him and Eric Bieniemy with Washington, who was formerly with Kansas City. I think both those guys are brilliant offensive-minded offensive coordinators that both need to be getting head coaching jobs immediately. And there is some Bieniemy stuff in his personal life, which has seemed to have been brought up against him being a head coach. But I think Bieniemy is a very talented offensive mind. He's done well with both Patrick Mahomes and Sam Howell. And I think there's some really good stuff there. So I would like to see that guy get the option. And honestly, at this point, if Ron Rivera is gone, if I'm Washington, I think I make the option to go with Bieniemy moving forward and possibly shake it up elsewhere on that team. I mean, he's obviously going to have a different OC. The DC to me is, I think that's Jack Del Rio, if I'm not correct. Yeah, I think it is Jack Del Rio is the DC, which is ironic because I thought Jack Del Rio is a former quarterback, or maybe I'm thinking his son is a former quarterback. But regardless, I've never been that excited about Jack Del Rio, so you got to go with someone else there for Washington. Start fresh with Eric Bieniemy, figure out how he wants to build his staff, and take it from there. We saw Raheem Morris announce his staff today. Three guys that I'm not personally familiar with, but let's see what happens there. I wish him the best. So that's kind of cool. But I think that's what is going to happen. I think Washington's going to hire Eric Bieniemy, and now with Ben Johnson not taking either job, I think the next step is probably Seattle. And I've been saying this the whole time, that Seattle brings in Dan Quinn from Dallas. So you definitely have that former Legion of Boom. You have good things happening there. And I think that's the way that team is going to shake up and make it work. So that's definitely the way that I think things are going to happen with those two teams. So I definitely get a feeling there that that's the way it goes, and that's what happens. So yeah, I think Dan Quinn goes to Seattle, Bieniemy goes to Washington, and that is what you have with those two final head coaching positions that need to be filled. So that's definitely your path moving forward there, and that's pretty much everything you got. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with head coaching options that are out there, and what is moving forward. So cool. I guess this is kind of a cool time of the year where you have some NFL All-Star Game stuff happening. I saw a little bit of play today with the Senior Bowl practice, and it was kind of interesting to see these big name quarterbacks playing. Obviously, no Caleb Williams because he knows he's going to be the number one pick somewhere, and the interesting part of that is, okay, he goes number one, whether it's Chicago, New England, Washington, who knows, but that kind of play is going to happen. But these other high name quarterbacks are being looked at really well. And you have a Bo Nix who's up there. You have a Michael Penix who's up there. You have a Drake May who's up there as well. I'm not sure if Drake May is in this Senior Bowl, but I definitely want to say it's something like Bo Nix and Penix are both on the same side. And whatever side of the All-Star game they are for the Senior Bowl, it's like stacked at quarterback. The only other name to me that really sticks out that's on the other side that, excuse me, to me, I'm actually really intrigued by is Spencer Rattler. And I think this is really cool because when it comes to these next level quarterbacks, I think in order to really succeed in the NFL, you need to have some kind of adversity that you have to overcome. And we've seen this with almost all the highest end quarterbacks that are in the NFL to a certain extent. Everyone's had these times of adversity, whether you're Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Alex Smith, all these guys have had adversity and they've persevered through it, and they've really done really well as a quarterback. Jalen Hurts is another one as well. And I saw Spencer Rattler today talk that even when he was at Oklahoma and he saw what Jalen Hurts did to move up on that team, really spoke volumes. And he thought it was really interesting to see his growth and how he took his situation from Alabama and made it a positive and made his growth at Oklahoma and did what he did. And now Spencer Rattler ended up doing the same. He left Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley took that Southern California job. And plus at Oklahoma, after Hurts went to the NFL, then Caleb Williams came in and knocked Rattler out. And that was the end of that story there. So with Caleb Williams coming to Oklahoma, that is what sent Spencer Rattler to South Carolina. And I think he did well with that. He learned from it. It took Spencer a few seasons, but he had some pretty nice games with South Carolina. And I think that made him NFL ready. And the cool thing is with a guy like that who has kind of that Kyler Murray kind of play style to him, this is a guy that I think you can get at a really good value in like the third, fourth, fifth. I don't know if he's going that far, but I think a guy like Spencer Rattler is going to go in the third or fourth round to a team that has possibly a similar style quarterback, or they see him as being the guy that has the ability to take over. And looking at, to me, a team that possibly in the third or fourth round might actually have to make a play at quarterback. The team that I'm kind of thinking about that I think would be a really interesting fit for him, there's actually two. And definitely, obviously, the Atlanta Falcons would be an interesting fit. Basically scrapping Desmond Ridder, knowing Taylor Heineke is a guy who can definitely fill in the shoes and do it. Maybe you do make a play with Spencer Rattler and maybe another quarterback out there. That is kind of what it's going to take. But again, I'm not familiar with Raheem Morris's OC, so we don't know what kind of style that guy goes with. But the team to me that I keep thinking of that I think Spencer Rattler would do well learning from and could actually do some really cool things with, and I think he could beat out every quarterback on this team. I think if Spencer Rattler went to Pittsburgh, I think that would be a very interesting fit because he would have a similar play style to Kenny Pickett, but I think he's better than him. I think Mitch Trubisky is probably the guy that they're done with. It just hasn't worked. And then they have Mason Rudolph, who kind of is that guy. But Rudolph doesn't have that mobility. He just has really good pocket presence. He has a heck of an arm, and that's Mason Rudolph's style. But I think bringing in a guy like Spencer Rattler, who either could be the guy or could get a little time to learn, could actually work out really, really well for this team. So I really like seeing that. And maybe that's a possibility that they go there with. And I think that could do him really well. Or maybe he goes to a Seattle or something like that. Maybe even my Raiders might actually take a look at a guy like that. I think that could be really dynamic too. So we are definitely going to be a team looking for a quarterback. So Spencer Rattler could easily be that guy too. Yeah, so those are kind of the options that we're seeing there. The other cool guy that, staying on that Oklahoma topic, came up with is a offensive lineman. Plus, he's a left tackle for the Oklahoma Sooners. He never gave up a single sack in 2023, and he also can play a little bit of tight end. That is some really cool stuff right there for a guy who can check in as a tight end. He can definitely catch downfield, or he can make some really cool blocks downfield. I think that is a really cool guy there that you could end up going with that could make a difference. So I saw that. And the other thing I saw too is that there is a receiver from Michigan who has a really, really fast time around like 4.3, something like that, I want to say. But that's a guy who could really make a difference with an NFL team with that kind of speed. But again, it all matters where these guys show up, where they go to. So I guess that's something to kind of keep your eyes on. I know there's a solid quarterback from Tulane, and there's a receiver on Tulane who kind of keeps running into coverage. So I'd kind of maybe stay clear of that. But you got some interesting things going on there with those guys. But those practices for the Reese's Senior Bowl, they are streaming those throughout this week. The one day that is kind of a little bit different for Senior Bowl coverage is Thursday. Thursday is the East-West Shrine game, which they usually have been playing in Las Vegas, but now they're kind of taking it on the road to various cities. And right now the place that they're playing at is I think it's the practice field of the Dallas Cowboys is where they're playing that game at. So you have the Reese's Senior Bowl at the University of South Alabama, and then you have the East-West Shrine game in Texas. And I wonder, too, if this is a thing where if a guy can play really well in that, In the past, they've invited maybe a handful of guys from there to play in Mobile, Alabama. But with those games being just a couple days apart, you got travel in there. I don't know how it's going to work. It is what it is, but that's kind of how they work things between the recent Senior Bowl and the East-West Shrine Game. In the past, they've been on different weeks, I want to say, but now they are definitely playing the East-West Shrine Game and the Senior Bowl the week leading up to the Super Bowl. So I like that. I think that's a cool way to create some buzz and create some interest with the week leading up to the Super Bowl. I think the Pro Bowl is on Saturday, but I'm not watching that. So it is what it is. Good news, I did like with the Pro Bowl, even though it's pretty much meaningless. And unfortunately, I think someone's going to get really, really hurt one of those days. I did like seeing that both Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown joined the Pro Bowl squad, as well as Kenny Clark from Green Bay. So some good NFC North stuff going on there. But those teams played pretty well this year. So how those guys didn't get announced from the get-go, just kind of weird. But I kind of hope that the NFL kind of does this in a way going forward like the NBA does, where if you're announced to like a first team or NBA All-Star selection, something like that, that is the meaningful thing when it comes to contracts or something like that. I think that's a cool way to go about it. And if you're a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, guy's clearly one of the top 5 best wide receivers in the NFL. And I think Amon-Ra is a guy that next season is going to do even better, knowing that Ben Johnson remains the OC, Jared Goff remains the quarterback. This team has a lot of fight and a lot of things to prove next season. So, and a guy that plays the slot is pretty tough to defend. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, those are 2 guys that when you're at the start of your fantasy draft, those guys who can play in the middle match up against a nickel who is usually the 3rd best cover corner on a team. I think those guys bring tremendous value right here, right now. So I think that's kind of the way to go with this. So that's everything we got for a week. Just got a notice from your boy DJ TRIGGS that he's a little tied up. Just got home, so we're gonna let him rest up for the night, and we'll bring you guys a heck of a show, or a hack of a show next week when we have your boy DJ TRIGGS here and myself, Steve Metrics. That's no debate. So yeah, we'll see you next week, and that's no debate.